Welcome to the Chiefs. The Chiefs is a White Ark podcast aimed at specifically giving you an insight into what makes great leaders and entrepreneurs in a variety of organisations tick. We call them Chiefs. My name is James Ciuffetelli, and together with my White Ark co-chief, Joe Hands, we're going to attempt to take you on a journey and talk to as many chiefs across as many industries as we can to give you an insight into A, what makes them tick, and B, what makes their enterprises thrive, and more importantly, what they've learnt along the way. The Chiefs.
We're recording. All right, are you ready to roll?
Are you the boss or am I the boss? You're the boss, sorry.
I'm the boss.
Got it.
I can't believe you're even asking that question. Welcome to the Chief, a White Ark podcast.
A White Park?
A White Park. A White Ark podcast aimed specifically at giving you an insight into what makes leaders in various organisations, the Chiefs, tick. My name is Joe Hands, and together with my White Ark co-chief, James Ciuffetelli, that I call JC, we will attempt to take you on a journey to talk to as many chiefs across as many industries to give you insights on what makes them tick, their organisations thrive, and more importantly, what they have learnt along the way. We've also created a newsletter called The Ark, which will be giving feedback to our subscribers, excellent content, podcast information that really helps organisations think differently, especially in this time as we're coming out of COVID. So if you haven't already, please sign up on whiteark.com.au. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing my co-founder and co-chief of White Ark, James Ciuffetelli, or JC. And he interviewed me in the first episode, so I've given him a chance to prepare because obviously this is going to be a hard one. And today, I get the pleasure of interviewing him. What we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about JC, a little bit about his journey, how did he get here, a little bit about White Ark, a few random questions thrown in that I haven't told him about to see how he's on his feet. And I hope that you just enjoy getting to know James and I a bit better and part of our journey around talking to chiefs and learning from their experiences. So I'm just going to get the roll. I'm going to get the rolls. What am I going to do?
You're going to get the ball rolling, I think, Joe.
Ball rolling. I'm going to get the ball rolling. So are you ready, James Ciuffetelli?
Great. It's great to be here, Joe. Thanks for having me on.
Please describe yourself in one word.
Passionate.
Passionate.
Yep.
What makes you so passionate, James Ciuffetelli?
I think there's a lot of words I probably could have used to describe myself, but passionate, I think, I just feel very fortunate to be at this point in my life. I feel very fortunate to be involved in White Ark. I got a great family, and, I just feel passionate about all elements of life. I think I've had a very fortunate story growing up in an Italian family, lots of interesting things. Everyone has interesting things go on in their life, but we had an interesting upbringing, migrating from Australia, parents who ran their own business. And one of the consistencies through life, Joe, for me, has been sort of family, friends, consistently evolving, learning, and definitely a high level of energy and passion in that journey. So I think they're all the things that go into making me passionate.
Well, I think passion is fantastic, and finding the thing that makes you passionate and what drives you in that energy piece. So I know you run 100 miles an hour, and there's always a lot going on in your personal life and in your professional life. So how do you have time out for yourself so that you can keep that energy and that passion alive?
That's a great question, and you're probably right. I mean, probably a trait we have in common is we both run at full speed, right? And we in whatever we're doing. But probably the things that keep me going, Joe, would be I like to divide time, if you like, between my family, my work, and also my own personal well-being, whether that be health and I love cycling, as you know, or just my own personal mental well-being. So I'm very fortunate. I've got a pretty supportive family. I've always had a really supportive family that understand I'm passionate about lots of things. So I like to sort of spend, a fairly good balance of time between obviously work, full tilt, working on my own mental state and learning. And I've always been very passionate about learning. And I love bike riding. So I think whatever you do, as long as you do it with passion and you have a development plan, that you take that on board full tilt, I think in life you can sort of achieve whatever you want. That's how I've gone about it.
I love that. And I think even more so than ever, making sure that you've got that right balance between work and your personal stuff, and taking the time on your mental health and well-being is so important, because it's been kind of a crazy year, right? And how have you approached the year from a personal perspective, and how have you built the resilience to be able to keep going in this really uncertain time?
Look, at the 2020 year's been a year out of the box, hasn't it? Really,
Yeah.
it's funny. We've kicked off White Ark. We probably couldn't have picked a better year to kick off White Ark, because we've had all the variables thrown at us. But I guess like we approach everything in life, you approach it with optimism and with veracity, and really been blessed with the opportunities this year. We've had a lot of time on our hands. If I think back to when COVID first hit, I was winding up my career, a great career that I loved at Census or at Yellow, and I remember we sent everybody home, right? And it was really weird, right? Like, we sent all of our staff home and we said, hey, here's how we're going to operate. My first sense was obviously for people's safety and what have you, but, I immediately actually missed the contact with people. So, then you had to find new ways in those early days of staying connected to your staff. And then, obviously I exited through COVID, which certainly wasn't what I'd envisaged. Then that gave me some upside. I got to spend suddenly quality time with my family and particularly with my children, and I got to engage them. I've got 3 kids, from a 15-year-old up to a 19-year-old, and I got to engage in a different setting on their terms, stuff that I hadn't done before. So I really, to answer your question, enjoyed that. And then we were kicking off White Ark, and what an interesting time to kick off a business where typically we had probably planned to do trips to interstate and overseas to meet with people who wanted to work with us. And then all of a sudden we had Zoom or Teams, and I suddenly had to become proficient with building energy and passion in a virtual sense, right? But that's been amazing. So you know what? I feel like 2020 has been a full-on year, but it's actually ended up being a great year. And then I balanced all of that. I found it was really, really important to find time in what felt like Groundhog Day. I was working 7 days a week because every day felt like Monday. But I found it really, really important. I'm an early riser. I love riding or spinning, or which is a certain bike, as opposed to anyone who might be listening to this. So I found actually having a real discipline for having at least sort of 60 to 90 minutes of exercise of some form really helped me sort of crystallize my thoughts, and then obviously going on walks and stuff like that. So that's what I've tried to do this year. It's been an unusual year, Joe. I'm looking forward to 2021 and getting back to normal, and maybe having some business meetings in restaurants and cafes or even in boardrooms.
Yeah, I know. It'll be an interesting transition to the new world that was the old world, but will never be the same as the old world. But I think some of the things you spoke about, which was what are the benefits out of this period, and being able to spend time with your family, to be able to think about, your own personal well-being as well as the business, being able to really invest the time in the new business and get things kicked off. And probably more than ever, businesses are looking for help in about how do they navigate this period. And you and I have been speaking to a lot of chiefs, right? And a lot of people in businesses who are just trying to work out, what do they do? How do they pivot? And so what are some of those conversations that you've been having with people, and how do you think the White Ark value proposition can really help them?
So one of our long-term goals was to really help businesses transform, right? And not necessarily digitally transform, but whether it was to take their value proposition to market in a startup sense, whether it was to take their value proposition so they could sell their business, or whether it was to help a private equity firm find a specific value proposition that fit a niche group of businesses that they already held. So what I have found really interesting, because one thing that COVID has given us is time.
Yeah.
Right? And I've even found that time to be in the moment, to be in those conversations with businesses. And what's been super interesting in being in that moment and being in that time is it doesn't matter what the industry is. Most businesses have got fairly consistent problems or opportunities. Like some of them, they struggled initially to pivot across. And when they pivoted across, they thought, okay, well, this is great. What we've saved, whatever amount of money in rent and what have you, and the business is still operating. But then they weren't sure whether their businesses were operating effectively or efficiently. And that was consistent across our clients, Joe, that were in manufacturing, our clients that were in FMCG, our clients that were in professional services. That was really consistent. So, and that was a conversation around, okay, so how are you leveraging technology? And so some of the interesting things that I think we've found from our clients and the problems that they've had has been just around, everybody seemed to enjoy that initial transition to COVID. Even staff and employees that we've spoken to, they loved it. They, probably not too dissimilar to ourselves, where I loved initially coming up for air and being home for dinner every night and being available, in my case, my teenage children, Our client staff loved that too. But then they went through that lull where they said, well, actually now we miss the contact with our peers, and we miss the learning that comes with me walking over to Charlie's desk and saying, hey, Charlie, I've got this problem on cash flow. How do I resolve it? So then all of a sudden the conversations with our clients are around, okay, well, how can we actually, in an age where things are going to be different forever, how can we leverage the best of both worlds to create a new normal? And really that's where most of our work has sort of come in from.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that we've really tried to do, I really like what you've said, is around trying to get that insight. So how have the consumer trends change? How are the customer trends change? And how does it mean that companies need to pivot, right? And I think it's the companies that pivot and how quickly they pivot are going to be the most successful. So that's really been our focus. So I've been taking you a little bit zigzag, but I do want to come back to some things that you said earlier on about your grassroots, because I think, who you are and what you stand for, so much of it is part of the journey that you've been on. So tell us about your story and tell us about your journey and how that has made you who you are.
It's a great question, Joe, and probably two facets to my story. So probably the first facet would say my early upbringings and the people who shaped and formed my values, which obviously were my family. And as I said earlier, mum and dad are both Italian immigrants to Australia. They'd both tell you that they're proud Australians. But, we've got a real rich connection to that Italian story, lots of family. My mum and dad always ran their own businesses. Dad was in the automotive arena, but he imported Maseratis for a period of time, spare parts, forever bringing over container. So I can remember with my sisters going through high school, we would do these general ledger books. We would do his marketing. We were always in and around his business. And it was super interesting for us. And I actually think it was also super insightful for all three of it, my two siblings and I, our lives, because we didn't realize what a rich experience we had being in and around his business. And then on weekends, we were in and around family. There was either family gatherings and family picnics, and like all Italian things, lots of food, lots of family, like a picnic with 200 people wasn't uncommon for us, every other Sunday. So that kind of shaped a lot of who I am, I believe. And that passion that I spoke about earlier was definitely formed in that phase there. Then if I think about sort of professionally, I went to uni. Initially, I did industrial design at RMIT. I had always dreamed of being Leonardo da Vinci or someone who'd go and design something. And my father would always say, just go and do accounting like your two sisters have done. And I ended up doing a finance degree as my second degree, and then third degree I did as a master's. But I've got 30 years experience across a variety of industries. Obviously, I started in automotive, and then I was in retail, manufacturing for a while. But then the last sort of 20 odd years I spent in digital, or in organizations going through digital disruption and digital change. And I've been really, really fortunate in my career to have sort of had so many different roles across my journey. I've worked, in sales, in go-to-market, in learning and development, in operations, in customer and product, and all in the last sort of 15, 20 years in an organization or in organizations within that organization that were going through transformation agendas, big ones. I was really, really fortunate, I think, in the last 6 years, Joe, I spent, and part of that with yourself, obviously, Census sold a major stake of its business to a private equity firm in Los Angeles, Platinum Equity. And I loved this part of my journey. For me, it kind of brought everything together. It brought that first chapter where I learnt, so much value for small business and what have you from my father. And then, the next chapter, which was all corporate, and, we under Telstra, they were great days. But under private equity in the last 6 years, we were able to transform a business completely into digital, but really in parallel, we ran our own business. I actually felt like working in private equity for those guys was just the most fabulous time. We ran it like crazy, but we were all the owners of that business, and we drove such an amazing return on investment for the shareholder. I believe we created a pretty good culture for our people in an industry that was really struggling around the world, and we were leading the way, little Australian business leading the way. And and then if I reflect on my time back, I love leading teams. I feel so fortunate to have worked with so many amazing people who I've learned so much for, and one of my greatest passions is learning. So to be able to work with peers, with owners, with customers, with staff that you learn from, and I think you've got to have a curiosity for learning, is what really has probably stood out for me on my journey.
That's absolutely fantastic. And some of the things that I picked up a couple of things, but this whole root cause in family and small business, right? And that you saw that your dad doing his own small business and the family doing their own small business, and really that's brought probably a different view to you. So you start to see that back as you talk about the private equity, and that you really felt like you were running your own business. And here you are today, the director and co-founder of White Ark. So getting to absolutely set up your own business from scratch. Tell us a bit about, from your perspective, what does White Ark mean to you? Why did we set it up? You know, what does it represent?
One of my lifelong dreams was to run my own business. And obviously, having grown up in business, you know, I watched dad and mum do particularly well, and most of our family members have got their own business. And then I sort of landed a career in corporate across a couple of sectors, telecommunications and what have you. And that was great too. But then it wasn't until Platinum Equity came along that the light bulb went off. And I remember you were actually around when that light bulb went off, and we said, hey, you know what? How good is this? I mean, you know what? These guys have come in and they've actually given us a template to help us transform this business and everywhere else in the world. And they basically gave us enough of structure and enough of a template, but basically said, now you guys are going to do it and you're going to run it and own it. And I remember you and I looking at each other going, hey, you know what? If we could go and help repeat this process for other businesses, like my father's business or like family members, you know, guys who'd made big businesses, you know, big private practice business, how amazing, how great a feeling would that give us? And that's where it was born. So I feel so fortunate that we were able to actually kick White Ark off this year, because it was a lot of hard work and planning that went into the dream. And I actually feel like, I mean, I look at the clients that we're helping today, or we're helping clients go to market in a way that they never dreamed they could go to market, or have strategies that they never thought they could have. We're helping organisations get to sale that never believed they could get to sale. We're helping a couple of organisations list. So, you know what, it's just been, I feel so privileged, and I still feel like I'm learning, right? I'm learning off you. I'm learning off our clients. And I think, you know, can I tell you, I'm really looking forward to the next 20 years, because I actually believe there's so much value that we can add, but that they can add, our various clients can add to themselves. They just can't see it.
Absolutely fantastic, Ciuff. A couple of the other things I picked up in your journey of how you got here, two things that I wanted to call out, and you keep talking about this point, and it's so important, is learning, right? And so there's, I suppose, formal ways of learning, and there's informal ways of learning, and there's, what are the things that you do to continue to learn and develop and grow as a professional and personally?
Yeah, it's a great question, Joe. Look, I mean, early in my life, I thought that the only way to learn was to go and study and to do degrees. And I did 3 degrees, right? Over my journey, I've completed 3 degrees. I did 2, and then I did a master's. And that was important. That was great, right? But what I soon realized is there's so much value in learning just by being curious, you know, and I feel blessed to have worked with great people, that if you're curious, and my father used to always have this saying, he used to say, you know what, if somebody is really good at something, ask them questions about that thing that they're good at, and you take it on board, put it in your pocket, and you go and do it better. Not because you want to outplay them or outperform them, but because you've been curious enough to get the learning. And I thought, wow, that's amazing, right? So I've always had a really curious streak. So I love surrounding myself with all sorts of people. Dad would always say, go and find people who are smarter than you and learn from them, right? And can I tell you, take it for granted. I remember growing up going, what's he talking about, right? But,
I'm the smartest.
Correct. I've gone to university, but you know what I learned was through curiosity, you can learn so much. I love traveling. I've had the good fortune of being able to travel so much, both personally, with my family, but also professionally. And again, you take that curiosity trait and you're always learning from different cultures. You're learning from different people. You're learning from different situations. I think professionally, on some of the trips that we had the good fortune of having at Telstra and at Census and at Yellow, you know, learning from peers who'd failed or who'd done something well, so you could actually take that learning on board. And I love reading, Joe. I think anything that's real. I'm not a very good fiction reader, but I love reading biographies or autobiographies or case studies through transformational books and what have you. So I just think there's always something to be had. So I think if you've sort of got curiosity, there's something to be learned.
Yeah, I love that. I love that whole curiosity thing, finding people that are smarter than you, asking lots of questions, and just continually thinking and podcasting and reading and understanding and evolving, right?
One of the things, Joe, through this COVID pandemic, I probably should have raised it earlier, was on rainy days when I jump on a spin bike at 5 a.m. and ride till 6:30, I loved listening to just diverse podcasts on whatever topic, right? Most recently, I've been actually learning about the US electoral system. Isn't that interesting? But there's so much, with time is limited, but if you use it correctly, there's so much to be had and to be learned.
Yeah. And then I'm going to go back to a couple of things you said earlier. And one of them I think is really, really interesting, right? So your kids are at an age, 15 to 19, you're at a really important age to kind of work out what they want to do with their lives and how things come together.
Yeah.
And you've had this opportunity to really spend this extra time with them. How do you think they're responding to seeing you set up your new business and you managing this transition from being in a big corporate to setting up your business? And how do you think it helps them in their journey, whatever that is?
I think that's a super question, right? Because one of the things that's actually made me proudest, and I think I've shared this with you quite a few times, is actually being able to share this with them. Because I think they've seen us, set up White Ark from when it was just an idea, right? Okay, we're going to do this and we're going to focus in transformation, go to market, and we're going to work with family practices and private equity. And these are the types of things that we're going to do. Okay, great. But then they actually saw us come up with a vision, come up with a purpose, come up with a name, build a website. And for them, I actually think it's actually helped them appreciate, A, yes, you can have an idea, but B, you know what, it actually takes forward momentum or action actually turn that, because I believe every human being has great intention. Every human being has probably 50,000 great ideas go through their brain in their lifetime, but a lot of people suffer through inaction, right? So I actually think what we actually have taught, I can see it through my kids, is leading by example, having the idea and saying, okay, not every day is going to be easy. It's going to be tough yards early, and it was tough yards, especially in the COVID kickoff. So leading by example, right? Trying to be a positive role model for them, I think, is going to set them up for success. And it gives me great pride when they actually talk to others or talk it back and say, oh, my dad and Joe are doing this, and this is how they went about it. In fact, my son, who's doing VC, our middle son, Luca, was actually talking in one of his economics exams. He said, I used White Ark as an example. I'm like, oh no, what's that for? And he goes, no, Dad, I actually spoke about how a startup needs to see it. I go, well, we're still in startup mode. But he said the undertone was, it was all about hard work, having a structure, and really being clear around what the end state vision was. And that made me really, really proud. So I think it's been massive for them.
Yeah. And one of the things I wanted to delve into a bit more is, I've seen you lead, right? And you talked about your interaction with people. And one of the things you missed about going out of the office was not being able to have that kind of personal interaction with people and your staff. So, what's your advice for leaders right now? It's a really tough time of trying to engage staff, take them on the journey. But what's your advice?
I actually think it's a really tough time to lead, because whilst we sent everybody home, and that was right, because our first objective as a leader needs to be to protect and look after our people, right?
Yeah.
So, in the face of this crisis in particular, we had to do that. But leading by example is hard when you can't. One of the things I used to love at work was being able to do, I used to call it a Pope's walk, but each morning and each night do a walk of the floor and just say hi to people. But if you do that, you have to be really in the moment.
Yeah.
You don't just do that because you say, well, it's an activity I've got to do. It's got to be something that you want to do because you care about the person that you're going to say hello to. And if you learn something about that person, that was personal, well, you have to be in the moment enough to remember that and actually engage it because it means something to you. So the advice I would give to people, that leading by example hasn't changed, right? So if you're fortunate enough to be a leader and your team of whatever is now all at home, make the calls, ask them how they're going, take responsibility as you would with your communications in the office. You've got to take that, if that's by phone, if that's by Zoom, if that's by going for a walk around the town. How many walks around the town have we done in this period, Joe, with customers and with clients and with some of our staff? And you do that because you want to engage. You want to, there's still an opportunity for them to inspire you to inspire them, to motivate them, but to stay on track with whatever the goals are, to set the example. So that's the advice I'd give. Be in the moment. Be in the moment and continue leading. Don't leverage the opportunity and say, well, Zoom's the only forum I've got. There are lots of forums, right? And be in the moment enough to ask your people how they're going.
I like that. And I think as the Ring of Steel comes away from Melbourne, I think it got announced today, as that Ring of Steel goes around, how do you actually start engaging your teams and your clients and have that personal interaction, right, in a safe and managed way? Great. So I wanted to ask you just like a random question around what's your favorite animal and why?
I thought you'd ask me something random like this. Look, I'd have to say probably my favorite animal, if I had to have one, would be a tiger.
Tiger. And that has nothing to do with your football team, right?
Well, the fact that the Tigers have won 3 premierships in 4 years in the AFL is just like the cream on top. And then and I do follow the Tigers, so I am a pretty passionate Tigers supporter. Now, look, I just think it's a beautiful animal. Right, like I mean, there's so many variations of tigers. You can have white Bengal tigers, and they're just a beautiful animal. The yellow and black ones are the most beautiful of all.
Yeah.
But you know what I love about tigers? You look at them and they've got poise, and then they've got strength, and and they're calm when they need to be calm. They're incredibly observant. I just think they're a beautiful animal.
And so, a little bit tweaking on that, but I read some articles around people's views about how the Tigers have won this many premierships, right? And one of the things that said, and I'm not a big footy person, but one of the things that said is that Brene Brown actually did some coaching with the team. Do you have any view on whether or not you believed that whole vulnerability and leading the way that Brene Brown, about daring to lead, if you think that impacted the Tigers?
I would say, from having been fortunate enough to have heard from Damien and Brendan, they would probably put 99% of their success down to that coaching that you refer to, right? And being vulnerable and being in the moment, but the whole team really leaning in and embracing that vulnerability, right? And I mean, there's even a story that Basher Hooley, who's, one of the great players for Richmond, came in halftime and went and sought out Benet and said, hey, you know what? I think I've torn my calf and it's really impacting me mentally. And she said, here's a guy that, at the peak of his game was vulnerable, was open enough to be vulnerable and say, hey, I'm frightened, I'm scared, what do I do? But she said that's what the whole club, and I think a lot of credit must go to Peggy, who's the president of Richmond, because there are times as a leader, and she's, I think, one of the most fabulous leaders in the Australian sporting arena anyway. There is time as leaders where you think you actually have to have all the answers, and you think that you have to set the tone. But she's actually taken a completely different path, and she's basically said, hey, we're as good as the sum of all the parts.
Yeah.
And if you go and ask anyone at Richmond, even Trent Cotchin says that when he got asked what makes Richmond so different, he goes, love and care for one another. So, you talk about connectivity. I think coaching, like I love learning. I love getting coached. I've had a coach for the last 5 or 6 years, and I feel incredibly privileged. Her influence on me has been phenomenal. But again, it comes down to leaning in and embracing that, because sometimes you don't want to hear what you hear. But if you take it on board, you can actually do something with that.
Yeah. No, it's really, really interesting. I think, the power of having a coach to actually help you through
so important.
Making the right decisions is really important. So we're nearly at the end, and I haven't even got to half the questions I wanted to ask, but I've asked you lots of other things, and it's been really super interesting from my perspective too. But I want to finish with one last question. When it's all over, how do you want to be remembered?
Oh, that's a great question. How do I want to be remembered? I hope people refer to me as someone who in some small part had a positive impact on their lives, on their careers, on their fleeting moment with me. I hope they see me as someone who had strong values, a lot of passion. But more importantly, I actually hope that I empower people to live their greatest life, their greatest journey, because I think there's so many people who infuse so much positive learnings for me that I hope I can just share one of those back with every person I come across. So I hope people sort of look back and say, hey, you know what, in my interactions with James, I was able to learn something, or was able to inspire me to do something, or in a positive sense like that.
Well, I think for the period that I've known you, and from working with you and building White Ark, I think the amount of positivity and people's lives you've impacted to date has been phenomenal. So may the next X number of years, which are many, many, that continue to grow and flourish so that you can get that dream alive. So absolutely thank you for your time today, James. It was really fantastic to learn a bit more about you. So much to still talk about, so we'll have to do another podcast at some point.
Sounds like a plan.
But I'm loving working with you on White Ark. I'm loving to hear more about you today, and I'm sure everybody who's listening to this podcast is great to connect with you and understand how you tick a bit further. So thank you for telling us how you tick, what influences you, what drives you, why White Ark, and a little bit about your journey. So thanks for sharing with us today, James.
Thanks for having me on, Joe, and I'm looking forward to many, many, many years of White Arking together. Good on you.